Good afternoon and welcome to the RIBA Journal's annual briefing. I'm Eleanor Young, Acting Editor of the RIBA Journal. Thanks for joining us. I hope you finished your lunch. I hope you found your snack pack, which I believe has been couriered at great expense to you, and you're opening that to enjoy it as we talk this afternoon. So we've got a treat today, an economic overview, then hearing from 3 architects in different sizes and types of practice about sustainability and specification for around 15 minutes each. We'll then go on to a question and answer session, which I hope you'll all contribute to. We'll finish at 3:30 in time for you to mop up your afternoon emails, at least I hope so. Please do feel free to put your questions in the chat as they occur to you, and we'll come to them at the end. Please also feel free to drop a note there or by email to our sales team. You're likely to know them already. We have Richard Tomlin, Head of Sponsorship and Sales at the RIBA, but with a special responsibility for the RIBA Journal. John Ward, our account manager in the South, who is based in the Kent coast, in Westgate-on-Sea, and Sunil Shah from Cullingworth in West Yorkshire, who covers the North and the Midlands, including all those red wall constituencies who'll be getting Future Towns money. So, on to RIBA Journal, away from more controversial things. It's been a strange year, but we're hearing good stories from architects who seem to be working flat out on projects. This lockdown hasn't knocked confidence, and the reinvention of last year in working patterns seems to mean that practices have had the resilience to keep running this time without that kind of big interruption we saw this time last year. So reinvention's been something of a theme in the last 12 months. In the spring, we launched our hugely popular Rethink 2025 competition for architects to imagine changes to our post-pandemic environment. And this was followed up by a series on sectors examining their direction post-pandemic. I mean, we're talking post-pandemic. I'm kind of hopeful. From schools and hospitals to the urban realm. Unlike others in our sector, we carried on publishing great buildings and pieces to support architects in both work and play, trying always to give that sense of a tangible connection that we're all missing. I suppose we feel we have a sense of responsibility. We know that 4 out of 5 architects read the RIBA Journal, 2/3 regularly. 7 out of 10 architects regard it as their most trusted publication. And 3 out of every 4 use RIBAJ.com. That's over 1 million hits per annum. That's all from the Construction Media Index, in case you think I'm just dreaming it up. Plus, I think it's the best looking publication on the market. We've been working on that a bit, which you may have noticed over the last couple of issues, those of you who get the paper magazine. So we've been sharpening up certain sections. We've got a new illustrator for faces, a kind of very interesting kind of paper cuts, and we've also changed the paper so you get the intense colours that you expect from brilliant architectural photography. For some of you, COVID will have meant furlough and budget cuts, but we've been amazed at how the market has continued to prosper despite everything. On behalf of our advertisers, we published 221 digital features this year and sent out 77 emails. Our 2020 print advertising market share is now at 45%, which is pretty high. That's 332 pages from 120 advertisers, and it's really bucking the trend in media and in architectural media. And we've created and hosted 7 webinars. This year, there'll be lots more. February's first webinar of the year on housing had an attendance of over 1,000. I'm not sure there's that many in the event today, but I'm hoping that we're pushing up the numbers. I think we've got kind of around 200, maybe a few more logged on or hoping to log on. So they're not the only plans we have. We publish regularly on sustainability, but also this year are planning to do an issue devoted to sustainability and the process of architecture. And that'll be in October ahead of the UK hosting COP26. We're on the lookout for opportunities for architects in our series Sweet Spot, and we're paying special attention to coverage of that underrepresented bunch of project runners who sit between concept design and initial specification. But the future of all of us depends on where the economy is going. And to give us some insights into the future is Adrian Malleson. So Adrian is going to give us an economic update. Hi, Adrian. He carries out a range of economic research, including RIBA future trends, which gives us all a kind of nod about where the rest of us think things are going, and the RIBA business benchmarking report, which is an invaluable tool that all chartered practices are need to input into and also get the results from. And he's closely monitoring the effects of COVID-19 on the architect's profession, and has done that through a number of surveys, as well as just having a little chat, I suspect. Adrian, let's hear from you about how the future is going to pan out.
Thanks, Eleanor, and thank you all for joining us. It's been a difficult year for many architects, but I think at the same time, what we're beginning to see is the first signs that things are on the up. So let me go through a few slides with you, and hopefully that will give us something of a clearer picture of what's ahead. I'll start with the economic context generally, drill down into the construction sector, then look specifically at architecture. So in terms of the global economy, we can see, and this is from the IMF, that 2020 was a really rough year, and it was rougher for the advanced economies than it was for emerging and developing economies. And I think among those economies, the UK has been hit particularly badly. These two graphs are from the Bank of England, and they show on the left, we see a really concentrated couple of years, and on the right, a longer term view up to 2024. So what we saw last year was a very sharp contraction with the first lockdown, and then a rapid expansion from that lockdown. But as we moved into the winter peak in infections, we saw the third lockdown, and that's with us now and is likely to last, as we know, throughout Q1 and early into Q2. The Bank of England's prediction then is that we've rapid growth through 2021. So by the end of 2021, we'll be somewhere like where we were at the end of 2019. In terms of construction output, we see a very similar picture. A very sharp contraction as sites closed in the first lockdown, and then recovery throughout the year, and then a dip, much less than the first time, a slight dip as we moved into the third lockdown. So this is construction output being adversely affected by the pandemic. And what does that mean? Well, what that means is that in 2020, we really lost about 5 years of growth, and we're just ahead of where we were in 2014. Indeed, we're about where we were before the Great Recession in 2009. So we've seen the largest annual decline since 2009, where it fell by around 13.5%. I think there's some subtleties coming out though, and this might be important when you're thinking about who and how to communicate with architects. We know that private new housing, particularly residential R&M, repair and maintenance and improvement, is important, particularly to smaller architects. And what we've seen is that housing repair and maintenance has actually grown since January last year by about 13%. So people are adapting their homes to new ways of working, and indeed they're relocating out of the cities. On the other hand, some of the larger commercial work, particularly in retail and office, is having a more difficult time as people are reassessing their need for office space, and people's shopping habits are moving away from the high street. That was a trend we were already seeing, but it's been massively accelerated through the pandemic. But what does the future hold? Well, this projection is taken from the Construction Products Association, but excluding industrial and infrastructure, which aren't the major architectural markets. So excluding those, what we can see is a strong contraction in 2020, then growth through 2021 and 2022. Of course, all these projections are highly contingent on the progress of the virus and how we deal with it. But the UK at the moment looks particularly well placed in terms of managing the exit from the virus. Now, let me move to the architectural market. And I'll share with you, this is going to be released later this week, but I thought you might appreciate a preview of the February Future Trends survey. And look, it's really encouraging. This graph shows the history of future trends. It shows the balance score. The balance score is the percentage of those who think work will increase, and then from that we deduct the percentage of those who think it will decrease to give an overall balance. And what you can see is that we had a big dip following the financial crisis. We had several years of recovery, and then with the referendum result, there was ongoing uncertainty for a number of years, which affected market and architectural confidence, not knowing which way the Brexit deal would go. The election results seemed to bring a new degree of optimism, but that was rapidly dashed by the onset of COVID and the first lockdown. And you can see that frighteningly low figure we hit last year. But we've seen a rapid growth in confidence, and this month, rather February, the balance figure now stands at plus 17. Notably, London is dragging a little behind the rest of the UK. And again, that partly reflects the importance of residential and retail work within London. Similarly, just to re-emphasize that point, private housing sector this month is way ahead of other sectors. Indeed, some architects are talking about having to prioritize residential work, or indeed even turning away potential projects. So it's a real turning point in terms of confidence. And perhaps in the past, London has been the first to grow and it's filtered out. Perhaps this time it's the inverse. The regions are growing and that will filter into London in due course. I'm going to very briefly, by way of introduction to Mina's piece, talk about the global challenges. So whilst we have market challenges in the UK, and whilst the indications are that we're overcoming those, there are real global challenges that in a sense dwarf the potential effects of COVID. And those global challenges are around urbanization and sustainability. I think it's been remarkable how quickly we've adapted to COVID-19. I think it's on us now to show equal ingenuity, equal readiness to adapt to the impending climate emergency. Just a few figures, globalization is a rapidly occurring process. By 2050, it'll be almost 70% of the world's population will be global. And you can see there that brings with it marked inequalities with informal housing and pressures on city sustainability. But cities really are an engine for global growth. They produce 70% of waste, 70% of greenhouse gas emissions, and consume 60% of the energy. But at the same time, they're responsible for 70% of global output. And that's why General Ban Ki-moon said that our struggle for global sustainability will be won or lost in our cities. And I think that necessity to bring sustainability is why the RIBA is increasingly aligning everything it does to the UN Habitat Global Sustainability Goals. I do encourage everyone who's working with architects, but more generally, to make themselves aware of the Sustainable Development Goals. In particular, Sustainable Goal 11, which is around sustainable cities and communities. Underneath that is a number of measurable targets, which architects will increasingly incorporate into their design work, and clients will increasingly incorporate into their briefs. And these are increasingly being measured through the ONS, the Office of National Statistics. So, for example, here's a metric aligned to Sustainable Development Goal 11, showing the percentages of homes that fail to meet the decent home standard within the UK. And it's an important point. The SDGs are not just for middle and low income countries, they're for the UK. Bristol, for example, have embedded the SDGs into their regional plan. Bristol is committed to delivering the SDGs locally, and that will affect how they procure the built environment in the future. And the RIBA is responding to these challenges in a number of ways, but I'd just like, by way of conclusion, to draw your attention to our declaration of an environmental and climate emergencies. We've signed up to make its principles in the SDGs part of our organizational strategy, culture and daily operations. And we are doing what we can to encourage both designers and clients to incorporate sustainability into the work they do and commission. We also produce a number of reports on how architects are responding to the climate emergency, and I would draw your attention to the Decade of Action report. There's a link embedded in here, which UN Habitat endorsed as a significant step towards creating sustainable urbanization. That's all from me. I hope that serves as a background of the economic context, and perhaps more importantly, serves as an introduction to some of the extremely important insights that Mina will be bringing to you in the next presentation. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Adrian. That was really interesting and good to kind of get sustainability and economics getting an equal billing. I think that's something we're trying to reflect through the magazine, that not only do you have to have work, but you have to be doing it in a way that helps our climate cope with the climate emergency and helps us survive. I want to introduce Mina, who is going to talk to us about what sustainability means for today's architects. Mina Hasman is Associate Director and Sustainability Lead at SOM. So the practice was once best known for designing iconic US skyscrapers, but now has a global presence. And I guess, Mina, a global responsibility. I'll leave you to answer that.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Eleanor. I just want to start sharing my screen. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this exciting event today. And I just wanted to walk you through some of the slides I have prepared. Hopefully you can all see that. But indeed, we have a global responsibility. So I would like to therefore frame today's discussions around three key areas that, with shifting priorities we see around the world, are changing the way we design, deliver, and construct built environments today, and will be more so in the near future. But before I specifically talk about these three key areas, I would like to briefly provide you an overview of SOM, as I think it's important to offer you the context of my perspective and the ideas that I'll be sharing today. Operating in 10 different cities around the world, and with its embedded interdisciplinary practice of architecture, urban planning, interior design, and engineering, SOM has been at the forefront of addressing emerging challenges over the last 85 years, merging architecture with intelligence of engineering. And it is because of these reasons that we have been able to contribute to the advancement of the architecture profession and design, I would hope so, at a global scale, which especially now demands a very integrated and holistic, as well as progressive yet programmatic solutions, as our industry is experiencing a momentous change. The latest report, as Adrian had walked you through briefly before, produced by the RIBA, evidences that the majority of the RIBA members are committed to this change and want to address climate emergency. And these members also believe that obsolescence of a business is inevitable if sustainable designs are not at the core of their practice. So how has this overall commitment been changing the architecture practice? The influence is evident in the way our focus and priorities have been shifting due to the significance of our work's impact becoming more and more evident over the recent years. Our process in the way we design, deliver, and construct, and even operate built environments has also been consequently changing. We now need to leverage a wider expertise to offer solutions that are holistic, to a certain extent ahead of time, and long-lasting. And the products we select and specify play a fundamental role in ensuring the real-life delivery of these sustainable outcomes that we so desire and need to achieve. I mentioned that we have been seeing a significant shift across the global built environment sector over the recent years. To crudely put, we no longer just need our buildings to be beautiful and affordable. We need them also to enhance our health and well-being and truly be sustainable in every aspect so that they mitigate climate change and can stand the test of time. And here I'm only talking about it all from a very focused perspective on sustainability and climate change, just to help guide today's conversation. There are, of course, other considerations that need to be taken into account when we talk about what we need from our buildings. If I may go back to the point I was making earlier, we no longer simply see buildings as mere beautiful objects detached from us and from the nature. Growing scientific evidence and other researches make it obvious that buildings we occupy have an impact on our health and well-being and can influence our lifestyle. And this inherent and inevitable relationship between the built, man-made environment and the living also exists with nature. It is therefore becoming an increasing expectation that the built environments we design must continuously safeguard the well-being of the people and the planet. As I had mentioned before, the process of the way we design, deliver, construct, and even operate buildings are inevitably changing. The traditional linear approach we have, where we go from one activity or task to another, without sometimes ever revisiting the previous activity, is now being replaced with a much more organic and iterative process, which results in a way, I would say, rather complex and convoluted journey in any given project. This is simply because of the multitude of challenges and the accumulated pressures that we need to respond to in tandem. And this too often means that we need to address competing priorities of, for instance, minimizing energy use in a building, while also increasing fresh or filtered airflow indoors, especially now, to reduce contamination risk, while also lowering capital costs as much as possible. So here, energy, health, and cost are in opposing corners to a certain extent, pulling the design in different directions. And you may all say that these pressures always existed, and that is true, but the intensity of them and also how far they need to be pushed wasn't the same before, because we simply weren't aware of, in this level of detail as we're today, about the impact the built environment has on the planetary health and people's well-being. As our awareness increases on the built environment's impact, we also see new drivers informing as well as shaping the market and the industry by redefining what good looks like. The RIBA 2030 Climate Challenge, the Greater London Authority's requirement for whole life carbon assessment in new buildings, and the Passive House Standard, as it is mandated by some of the local authorities in London, are some of such ambitious drivers. And these are just the sustainability-focused ones. When we overlay the demand set by the heightened fire and life safety requirements, the overall picture becomes even more complex and daunting. It's for this reason, as architects, we're in need of leveraging expertise from a wider group of individuals than we would have typically engaged with, more than ever now. And with its newly announced mandatory competencies as part of the Way Ahead initiative, the RIBA is actually putting in motion upskilling of the current architects to equip them with the right knowledge and skills required in order to competently address the multitude of growing challenges I mentioned before. But we all acknowledge that this will take time before this is all mainstream. And in an interim period, and this may still luckily be the case even after climate literacy becomes a mainstream trait, our design teams will continue to grow in size and or in specialty. A typical client architect MEP consultant team is now expanding to include sustainability consultants, almost as a default. And even within that consultancy, it specifically seeks for zero carbon experts. As more information gets layered into our design thinking, approach, and evolution, our choices and decisions are also being placed at scrutiny, especially as it relates to materials and product specifications. They are put under a microscope, where the layers are scrutinized for how much they will minimize the negative impact on people's health and planet's well-being. The desire to understand material ingredients are surely gaining a momentum. And especially with building and material passports emerging and third-party rating systems of LEED, BREEAM, and WELL, which encourage such practice, low carbon, low chemical materials are being placed at the top of architects' lists. This is perhaps more of a consistent reality in large-scale projects, which I work on, where the quantity of materials is large, hence their impact can be quite significant. And at SOM, we call this de-specification, where we dechemicalize and decarbonize our specifications, all of which rendering sustainable and healthy materials as well as products always our preferred choice. This is a growing trend we see across the global built environment sector, where many, especially architecture firms, are updating their specifications and building their own databases to filter materials and products based on their environmental and health impacts. A well-established, publicly available international database of such is the one called Mindful Materials. It's a comprehensive database that aims to transform the industry one material at a time, as they say it, by providing a common platform for manufacturers to communicate transparency and optimization information of their building products. And in this context, materials and products that have credentials, such as environmental product declarations, or health product declarations, or cradle-to-cradle certification that somewhat guarantee low or zero carbon and chemical content become the preferred choice for many, of course, cost permitting. An example presented here, which is one of our projects currently in construction in Chicago, has achieved a significant carbon and chemical content reduction in materials by specifying 40 materials with environmental product declarations and 100% low VOC, in other words, low chemical content products for the building's entire facade. All in all, I would like to conclude by saying that we're in an era where people's well-being and planetary health must be managed as a balancing act, where new industry and market drivers redefine what good looks like, and where material and product specifications play an essential role in ensuring that we have a chance in addressing climate change. Change is due and change is here, as the RIBA President Alan Jones says, and it is now our collective responsibility to be the standard bearers for the future of our planet and our well-being. Thank you.
Thanks, Mina. That was really interesting. I like your wavy line. It looks like a nightmare designing at the moment. I also was particularly interested in that kind of idea of de-specification. So going through maybe a list that has been drawn up without complete awareness of all the issues and kind of ticking off what's got an EPD, what's got a passport in future, what's got statements about low VOCs. So I think all those who are on board today will probably be very interested to think about their own products and how that relates to them, what they can do in terms of certification. Of course, we do know from Grenfell that there have been problems with certification, but I think that's kind of where we have to rely on the industry to produce the best information that we can. So thank you very much, Mina. That's really interesting. Next, we have Catrina Stewart and Hugh McEwen, who will be opening up the specification process, telling us about how it is in small practice, in particular their small practice, Office S&M. So Hugh is an RIBA Journal Rising Star. And Catrina, I feel like you should have been part of that kind of Rising Star Award, because I know a lot of things with stuff that you've done together. And they're both making waves in their architecture with intense and energetic projects, very different from the kind of huge machine of SOM. And of course, they're also inventing all the processes that allow architects to work well, including specification. So tell us how you do it. I'll leave you to it.
Hi everyone. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting us to speak today. I'm Catrina Stewart, and this is Hugh McEwen. And together we founded Office S&M back in 2013. So we're a small practice. This is the current team of 4. And when we're not working from home, we are based in Dalston in East London. Now, as a practice, we work with a 50-50 split of public and private clients on individual homes, new build housing, workspace retrofit, and public realm projects. We work on at many different scales, from home extensions, such as this Valletta House project, where we often work with families and individuals to develop personal and characterful designs for their homes, exploring the use of inventive and often sustainable materials. We also work on new build housing. So this new build to let 3-bedroom house called Salmon House. And with all of our projects, we respond to the context, the house, the street, acknowledging the existing while deploying colour and narrative inventively to create drama. We also work on multi-unit schemes, such as this project, and we work in a really collaborative way with our clients and manufacturers, experimenting with colours and materials to deliver joyful spaces. We're always deeply interested in how people experience the space we design. This means we want to draw on the needs and ideas of clients who know what they want from a space, designing for their health and their well-being of the occupants who will inhabit the spaces.
So today we're going to talk to you about a few of our residential projects. I'm just going to lead you through a couple of examples of kind of how we approach specification, and then we're going to have a bit of a kind of case study. These will sort of also highlight sort of the sustainable aspects of specification that we're always looking at. So as Catrina mentioned, this is Salmon House, which is a build-to-rent new build house. And here we were looking for a materiality on the exterior that would be incredibly durable because it would be rented, but also could be very personal to the occupants. So we wanted to develop something that the tenants could feel a sense of ownership over. And so we started looking for something that could be, very well insulated. We developed an external wall insulation with a rendered finish, and we became aware of, or we had already known, Stowe through their work with artists and architects on exhibitions, and we felt that it could be a kind of interesting material to develop further. We worked really closely with them through their materials library. So they have a space called the Werkstatt, where they have this incredible range of materials in different colors and finishes, but also a clear understanding of kind of the durability and build-up that we could explain to the contractor, etc. So we ended up developing something that could be very durable. So it has mesh layers within it over the external wall insulation, but then also through developing this kind of unique pink finish, something that the tenants end up being able to explain to their friends that they live in the pink house at the end of the road. We also look at very kind of unusual materials, and we're always trying to sort of use things in maybe an unusual or unexpected way. So with this project, Janus House, which is a house extension in Walthamstow, we ended up using quite an unexpected material for the kind of black exterior of it. It's actually a product that was developed for oil rigs. It's called Pro-Col Polyurea, and we worked with a company called ESW to install it. And we'd seen this material, which is this monolithic spray-on waterproof finish. We'd seen it used on art projects and in sort of set design, but never on a domestic scale. And so we had to work really closely with the manufacturer to develop kind of how we would actually install this, how we would work with it on a domestic setting, which we did, and developed this amazing finish, which is sprays on in and becomes solid in a fraction of a second. It's sprayed on hot and cools to become this completely watertight monolithic exterior that's completely airtight as well, and so really locks in the heat as well. And we work with them really closely to develop how we would install that onto this site.
So we're going to go into a little bit more detail about a particular project which we recently completed called Motel House. And this project was a remodelling of the lower ground floor of a Victorian townhouse in Islington for a young family of 4. And the name Motel House signifies the client's aspirations for their home. They wanted a joyful, bright and colourful escape from the grey London skies. So these are just some existing or previous photos, and they wanted to transform this, previously damp, dark and cramped space on the lower ground floor of their house. And in terms of layout, it wasn't what we did wasn't particularly drastic, but it allowed a lot more kind of natural light to enter the space. So what we did was we removed this internal wall, and what that created was a dual aspect kitchen and dining space. And it meant that all the light coming through the south-facing window would go all the way through the space and create these views into the garden. Now, the client who we were working with is a really interesting client called Tamsin Chislett, who works in the sustainable fashion industry and is a co-founder of a company called On Loan, and it's an online service which believes in lending fashion rather than consuming it. So for this client, reducing waste was particularly important, and it was really important for us to use sustainable materials and really think about the kind of durability of the spaces to create a space that would be long-lasting for the children to grow up in. So we started looking at other manufacturers and other product designers who have similar principles in reducing waste. And in particular, we came across, we previously knew about Granby Workshop, who make a lot of products using either recycled materials or really thinking about where their sources are coming from. And the other was Smile Plastics, who recycle plastic and recycle what would traditionally be seen as kind of waste into really luxurious and beautiful products.
So as we started to kind of use these materials and sort of think about kind of how they could be deployed in the space, we started thinking of them almost as kind of being characters, and these characters sort of started to inhabit this space and create views kind of in between parts of the space. We were also kind of keeping elements and refurbishing them, such as the staircase, to make the most of what was already there and recycle the fabric of the existing building. In terms of kind of then how we were approaching specification of kind of more of the elements of the space, we often use social media to find kind of new manufacturers, new materials that might be being developed by graduates and sort of starting to come to market, and really kind of looking at alternative ways of finding out about materials. There's a website that we really like using called Toniton, which kind of shows sort of hypothetical views of how these could be brought together, but also kind of really, really clear, explanations of cost and procurement. And these are really incredibly useful for the client. At the same time, we want to back that up with kind of real understanding of how that can be delivered and how it can be built. And we obviously use RIBA Journal for kind of providing information in terms of specification kind of more traditional parts of the materials as well, or detailing. And so this brings this kind of approach sort of brings all of these elements together. We've got elements of the recycled plastics, pieces of furniture that the client had selected, etc., and sort of bring that together in a kind of cohesive whole. And then these elements, these materials, end up being deployed kind of around the space, so that you're having views not only in and out of the space, but also between elements within the space, and between kind of connections between the materials, so connections between elements that might be kind of glossy or might be fixed to the wall, etc.
So we also wanted to use materials and kind of products that really told a story, and the clients were really interested in this. They wanted to know where these materials were coming from, where how they were made, how they were sourced. And so, for example, this product manufacturer again is a Granby workshop, and they, especially on their websites and their printed materials, they always tell the story of how these products came to be, both in terms of the design, but also the materials that they're using. So the clients really liked these lamps, and were particularly interested in how they were using, recycled materials, recycled brick grog, to then be hung above their dining table in the space in Motel House. So the other thing that we find really, really useful in trying to convince or talk to clients about the importance of sustainability is actually companies that provide really clear data and really clear information about where their materials are coming from, what the build-ups are, and how much of it is recycled or comes from natural kind of sources. And this we find really useful as a tool to kind of explain and talk to clients about. And this particular project, we were interested in using materials that recycled domestic waste. So the clients were really interested in Smile Plastics because we were using these worktops that were using recycled kind of yogurt cartons. So in this case, the Black Dapple recycles milk bottles and chopping boards. So there was this idea that the waste that they were producing from the kitchen was then recast into these work surfaces that were then being used in their bathrooms. So samples we always find really, really useful, and really, and we always kind of order samples in order to be able to kind of talk to our clients about these materials, because it's really important to be able to kind of touch them and feel them and also test them in the spaces. So in this project in particular, all the samples had to be tested with their 2-year-old son and their baby to make sure that it was that they were really kind of durable. The other thing is that and we're seeing it more and more in young practices. We often, when we go on kind of websites and when we look to order materials, so often in the colour section, we only really find greys and beige, and we really, really appreciate it when manufacturers do offer more colours, because I think there is a real kind of appetite for it, and in this project in particular, colour was just so important, and completely, it's quite an economic material and a cost-effective material, but completely transforms the space and took a space that was dark and damp and not very nice to be into this bright and kind of joyful space.
So another aspect is really about customization. So I think, as Catrina mentioned, being able to then have a product that we can actually specify in another color, we can start to have more conversations with the client about that. They can sort of see how something is kind of affordable and durable, but also can be bespoke to them as well. And this really allows us to kind of, you know, test things and develop something that's quite special, but still on a budget, still knowing that it's very, very deliverable. So for example, here, the curves and radiuses of the kitchen and its integration with the larder, which is the blue object in the middle, became kind of really important. And it's a very simple, you know, thing, but kind of color matching and being able to kind of be very particular about how colors would be sort of offset against each other was really, really important. Another, you know, basic one, but a really, really important one is having two-dimensional and three-dimensional information. We're seeing more and more opportunities both to design in 3D, but also visualize in 3D. So augmented reality apps or 3D viewers are giving a huge amount of control or kind of, you know, understanding back to a client, because I think, as Catrina said, you know, all of these aspects really play into how we can talk to our clients about, you know, design moves and decisions that are part of the narrative of the overall space, and then give us the opportunity to almost kind of test these things before they're ever deployed into the space, so we can see the materiality, we can understand how they're spatially going to work and how the end product is going to be realized.
And as Hugh was saying, narrative is such an important part of our practice, and it's something that's, you know, we use a lot in the way that we kind of approach projects and design, and we also think that it's really, really important to photograph our designs really, really carefully. So we always use professional photographers, so in this case French and Thai, to carefully photograph all of our projects. But we also use these photographs as a way of promoting the products and the manufacturers and makers that we've worked with and collaborated with on all of these, you know, in all of the projects. So of course, in this case, we had to use an on-loan top to promote our clients' fashion online service. But I think it's always really, you know, especially on social media and in publications, the story behind these products and these materials and you know, the families that we're designing for become such an important part of you know, of talking about the project, and it's something that people are really, really interested in. So we've been really lucky with this project. It's been very kind of widely published in El Deco and the Guardian, and you can see here, you know, we're always we work so collaboratively with makers and manufacturers. We always want to kind of promote the work that they do, because we know that, you know, we're really proud of the designs and the products that we're using, and we know that the clients are as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hugh and Catrina. That was really interesting. Also to get the story behind Motel House, because I do think, you know, you see the picture around, and I've seen it in lots of places, and it just looks so remarkable. And then you kind of showing that how you kind of process of sort of picking through materials, surfaces in particular, and working them out. I think, I mean, there was lots to learn there, I thought, but I thought kind of finding stuff on social media, you finding about materials on social media was particularly interesting. The desire to have some other colours other than grey and beige offered as a kind of maybe standard, or at least so that you can see it's possible, and the kind of need for 3D information, all things that I think might be useful to take away. I would say on colour, we have been going through a very grey patch, not from COVID, but just generally sort of grey, brown, muted colours. That's been in fashion, and it's definitely been in architecture. I really am seeing younger practices particularly coming up with more colours. I mean, you're leading examples in that, I would say, but I definitely think that's something that lots of people are working with. and we're going to see a resurgence of. Now, I can't remember what the Pantone colours this year were meant to be, the trends. They were immensely boring. That's not what I see in architecture. I see much more, well, I'd call them kind of postmodern colours, kind of quite bright, sometimes clashing. It's not sort of pastels. It's not sort of pale. It's kind of intense. Give me a hit, you know. And I think you could actually, it started before COVID, the colour thing, but you could link it to, you know, people have talked after the Spanish flu of kind of cinemas and mass entertainment, kind of life coming back. And I think we're going to see an explosion of it. I think it could be really exciting. It might be spring. I might be just because I'm looking out the window and the leaves. Anyway, hopefully. So thank you, Hugh and Catrina. That's really great. So on to more investigating products in a larger practice. Orford, Hall, Monaghan, Morris, who've actually been doing colour for yonks and have always been rather brilliant at it. Patrick Crocock is Technical Design Specification Lead at AHMM. And there's not many people, Patrick, working in architecture with such an expertise in specification.
Thank you.
I mean, I'm guessing because of your job. No, I've not spent a long time talking about specification with you, so I'm really interested to know how you go about it, particularly given your previous experience at Foster's and ACOM, other kind of major practices. I know from the green room conversation that you also have a wicked sense of humour. So let's see if that's revealed too. I'll leave you to it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I want to thank you for first inviting me to talk about this. Some of you might know, I'll give you a bit of insight into me. I started work out as a civil engineer and gradually fell into architecture over 24 years while working. I'm the specifications lead at AHMM in the technical team. AHMM recently celebrated their 30th year. So congratulations to the 4 guys. It's going to be a bit of a different act than the previous one, which will be a tough one to follow. As you know, we deal on a far larger scale. So with the ever-changing landscape of architecture and building and construction, design has become more of the forefront, especially the fallout post Grenfell, and with especially with AHMM being one of the founding signatories of Architects Declare, how we have to change the way we design and the way we think to combat and act on the serious issues of climate change and biodiversity. So it kind of pushes manufacturers to have the accessibility to their information far more important than it ever has been before. So if you go to the next slide, please. So, oh, that's me. Oh, sorry, as I said, over 20 years experience. So it's kind of how do we select what products, how do we want to use them? We look at many different things. Where do we expect to get the information from? And how accessible is that information? So basically how we kind of start off, if we go to the next slide, is the initial investigations. So we generally look at previous projects for maybe, from similar sectors. We look at materials that have been used, maybe finishes that have been used, systems. That gives it an initial guide. Then we look at, talk to other team members. We have our own building element sheets that we complete. And we're, for facades, for stairs, for signage, even for things like FF&E. Next slide. So as I said, previous projects, then we go how well it worked, any innovation that has had. Is there a new material, a new system? How was it used? Was it used in an unconventional way? Was it, I think we've jumped ahead there. Was it from an exterior use that we brought it internally? Was it from maybe another sector, like in the previous presentation, where they took something from an oil rig for a severe marine environment and brought it into a more urban? And then, you know, maybe it was used in a ceiling application. We put it to a wall or a floor. We put it up to the ceiling. Just different ways of thinking how we can change it up. Then we looked at how the product has moved on. Has it, you know, has the manufacturer changed it? How have they made it more carbon friendly? Maybe they've changed the way that they manufacture it, how it's processed. Maybe it's transportation. We just kind of pick up on all those little things. And then about installation, visually how it looks. And then about new methods of construction and new methods of manufacturing. We look at, you know, where things have become more factory manufactured and brought into place. So, you know, more modular methods of construction. Next slide. And then we look at the relationships that we've had with previous manufacturers. Experience with them. As we all know, relationships can be quite fragile. So we can go to the next slide. You know, how well have we worked together with them? Next slide. Was there any, that was our experience? Was it good or bad? Was the, you know, was the material or was the finish or the system we use specialists? You know, we have things like intumescent paint that can be quite complicated when it has interfacing with, you know, other materials, other systems. Next slide. And then the follow-up of it. How was our experience, you know, after discussions, you know, post-installation or during the installation, or even just in the early onset of, we've made an inquiry, what has happened since the inquiry was made, what was, you know, the relationship that was built. Next slide. And then most important is information, the information exchanges between the manufacturers and ourselves. Next slide. So, you know, we have our own technical team. So do they have their own technical team? Next slide. You know, have they got a specification manager? Have they got somebody that oversees the whole process? Somebody that we have a direct link to, somebody that we can collaborate with? Next slide. What knowledge have they got? Have we got experienced knowledge of them? Have they worked in different varying sectors? You know, have they worked offshore? Have they worked within retail? Have they worked within mixed use, office, residential? Just to bring all that together. Next slide. How accessible is their information? I'm going to have a slide later on about that. Next slide. And the collaboration between the team of ourselves internally, the other design team members from external consultants, and the actual manufacturers themselves, how we can all get around and share this information together. Next slide. So again, this is the information exchanges. Where do we get our initial information from? Well, maybe websites, some literature. As the previous presentation said, social media is a great place to look and gather information. How accessible is that information? You know, is it firsthand? Do we have to go through incessant emails, calls, whatever? Navigation, nothing worse than having a website that you can't navigate through seamlessly. You know, you might have to click on one button, another button, another button, another button, you know, and then you might get directed to another website. It can be very, very disheartening when an architect is trying to research a material or a product. Downloads, how accessible is it for downloading the information so you can store it on your own server and your own project folder? I mean, a lot of the information that we keep changes through every time it gets reinvented. Maybe new testing regimes have come out, new standards, new regulations. So we kind of need to have a process where to keep the information that was relevant at the time that we were designing, so it matches the regulations and standards that were in place at that time. Very interesting to get some case studies, you know, to look at maybe previous projects from other practices, other designers, then see how they use the materials that we were looking at. And again, brochures, again, they're quite handy about how colourfully they present their own materials in a format that is, you know, easily readable, a page turner or a screen turner, however they do present it. Next slide. Okay, so kind of these is the places of where we look, because AHMM has used the NBS specification writing platforms since time began, I assume, like most people. Started off with building, then we used NBS Create, and now we're using NBS Course. NBS Course on it has a linked platform called NBS Source, which is actually the RIBA product selector, NBS Plus, and the BIM model library that has linked all this together in one place. So this is quite a great innovative place to what we look for. So next slide. So, you know, it's like things that we can find there. So there's nothing better than to have the product information in front of you, have the information handy so you can make informed decisions about what products you want to use. Here we have a selection of different blocks from that platform where the information is structured in such a way that it's easy for the architect to make a decision, whether it's in relation to fire, whether it's in relation to carbon footprint, you know, whether it's cradle to cradle, you know, just to make that informed decision when it comes to actually selecting the product itself. Next slide. So these are the things that we definitely need to know. Next slide. So Bbs certificates are something similar, where we can investigate the product itself in relation to building regulations, how it's put together, different standards that it's been used to, technical data sheets, material data sheets, safety data sheets, just to look at the product itself. How is it handled? Does it injure your health in installing it? How is it accessed? How is it, you know, laid in place? Things like slip resistance, you know, these things that become important. EPDs, environmental product declarations, really, really important, especially when it comes to clients' aspirations for the design, the end use of their building, occupancy. You know, this all has to relate to the palette of materials that we propose, that we put forward, that have been selected. But this all, again, has to be selected against cost. You know, and cost, then we have to offset that against, you know, trying to reduce the carbon footprint, trying to make sure that materials have low VOC contents, to, you know, to make sure that our environments that we're building, that we're putting people in, are safe for them to breathe in, safe for them to work in. You know, COVID has changed a lot of that, especially in the way that we work. We have to make buildings more pandemic friendly, I suppose. So how materials are used, what kind of materials we use, are they antimicrobial materials, or do we have sensors in place, you know, instead of where people handle doors, you know, things like that. Next. And testing data is really, really, really important, you know, and that the testing data is transparent, that it follows a certain logic that an architect, you know, can read, easily understand, and then review this against, you know, the building regulations, you know, the approved documents, the fire report that has been prepared by their fire consultant, and so they can make an informed decision about, yes, I can use this product, you know, this comes with a classification that meets the classification that, you know, for a lining or for the external parts of the facade, whatever. So these things are really, really important. And if they're not accessible and available, then, you know, we can't make an informed decision, and therefore we may overlook one manufacturer for another, or we may not even consider the product, because if that accessibility is not there, if we can't find those things that are important to the design, to meet the client's aspirations, to make our declaration that we will provide better, safer, more carbon neutral buildings, and that buildings that we can put people in that they can feel safe. Next slide. So help me to help you, and thank you. I've tried to keep it short.
Thanks very much, Patrick. That was really interesting. I mean, just feel the weight of the stuff you have to navigate there, and the kind of like, phew, because Chorus is doing some of that for you. It does really look like it makes sense. But of course, what they're doing is only pulling everything together so that it's kind of, you can see it against each other, and you can get an idea of a certification and so on. I mean, it's still a huge amount of data, and I think knowing how important that is to be navigable is really important.
Well, I mean, if the information is available, architects can make informed decisions, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we have got lots of questions, which I'm really pleased to see. So I'm going to ask Richard, who is running our backstage, to put up the panel. Or I'd ask you to come and have a seat on the stage, everybody. Okay, so I'm going to run through the questions as they've been posted. We've got a kind of slightly different setup from you guys listening, so I hope we've got everything. Jonathan Lois asked Adrian. So Adrian said that the UK is better placed to bounce back post-COVID. I think that's than other countries. Is that because we've fallen further, or down to another reason? Adrian.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I hope you can hear me okay. Well, yes, there is a significant part of it is the UK has done particularly badly at managing the pandemic, and that has meant that the UK economy has been particularly badly affected. And the flip side of that is that the bounce should be bigger, but that bounce is aided. I think I'll draw a couple of things to your attention. It's aided by the flip of the management of the lockdowns is the incredibly successful management of the vaccination program. So we should be resuming to normal, perhaps quicker than some other countries. And I think the other thing I'd say is that the UK is a pretty flexible economy, and it's often design and innovation led, which is why the architectural community is so successful. So I think that innovative approach, that flexible approach to new market conditions will serve the UK very well in the coming years. Of course, I haven't spoken about the significant drag of Brexit, but let's leave that to one side.
Yeah, that's interesting, Adrian, you say that, because I mean, I thought one of the important factors in our flexibility as a country was that we had this ability to grow and shrink or have a migrant workforce. People are coming and going, and that was an important part of it. So I'm sure Brexit will play a part in that. I think the next one probably should be directed to Mina. It's from William McDowell. Thanks for your question, William. How high a priority is natural daylight for architects, and does it change priority by sector? And you're a good one to answer that because you know a lot about well-being, I think, Mina.
Yes, I'm happy to answer that. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you for that question also, William. It is really important. And I think rather than talking about perhaps sectors as just the different building uses will have significantly different daylight requirements. For example, if we are as architects designing healthcare, hospitals or schools, then the requirements of the daylight gets heightened to a certain extent because they can significantly contribute to the recovery process in patients, or to the learning process of the students, especially at a young age. So, but I think overall, to answer your question, daylight is really important. So I think there isn't any building or built environment that wouldn't benefit from daylight. And
I think it's also written into the WELL standard that's such a critical thing. Kathy Barlow-Smith from Goodfellow PR, just asking about the code for construction product information. So I think this is probably one for Patrick. Let me just read it out. How important will the code for construction product information be in restoring architects' confidence in information from manufacturers? So I'm sure you're aware of this, Patrick. But yes. It's kind of part of looking at, well, you probably are better at describing it. Maybe you could just briefly summarize it and then say what you think the value is to architects.
I mean, it's just to have, I suppose the best way to put it is something like Netflix, where you have a set of metadata, and that metadata is in place so that when a product's information changes, it changes the same way, it becomes relevant. So it's like the new version of it comes up. So it means you can scan your products, or you can identify your products no matter where they are, and it's current. So you can track your product from being specified from manufacturer to come to site to being installed. Everything has a chain, and that chain can be easily followed.
And that's kind of come out of Grenfell and the issues.
Yeah,
on that.
yeah, and it's going to be very important with the golden thread and the key deliverables at each stage along the design process.
Yeah, so it's currently under discussion. Is that correct? It's part of the building safety bill, I believe.
It is part of it. Yes.
And so, I mean, I'm guessing you're in favour.
I am indeed, because to have a product specified and then have something that is not the same product turn up on site, that may not have the same performance that you wanted to have, and you can easily track and manage that. So yeah. It's more like a kind of a stock take of what's coming and what's going, not just for numeracy, but also in relation to the performance of those items. Yeah.
So hopefully, I mean, will it restore architects' confidence in terms of tests being done fully correctly in the first place?
I think so. I mean, there's been a fallout after, post Grenfell.
The inquiry,
Yes, with the inquiry that's going on. There has been some light thrown onto some certificates from certain manufacturers. But I mean, this is a way that we can restore confidence in that the products that are being specified are the correct products to be used, and they can be used in that instance in that way. But that's why. Sorry. Well, that's why that information, like the BBA certs, are so critical, in that it tells you how a product should be installed, the installation methods that need to be used to it, and that it is fit for that purpose.
Yeah. So this is kind of a related question, just a brief one, if you don't mind, Adrian. From Mitch G. How does Adrian believe that the requirement to reclad thousands of unsafe high-rise buildings impact on the construction output figures?
Okay, it's very significant. Just to give it a bit of context, the National Housing Federation estimate just for housing associations, the cost could run into about £10 billion. It's going to not just affect the public sector and housing associations, but also, of course, private sector, hospitals, student accommodation, and hotels. It's big potatoes, and the majority of the work is CLG done in 2021, 2022. So it'll have a big.
Really major. Okay. Yeah. So we've got John Ward, who's RIBA Journal, and thanks for the question, John. The general feeling seems to be that in post-pandemic times there will be greater emphasis on more remote and flexible working. So I'm going to come to Mina, then Catrina and Hugh, and then Patrick, if he's got anything to add. So how will this inform how you work on clients' office spaces in the future? Have you had any insight into this, Mina?
To be honestly, not. But I think what we have been experiencing over the last year, which is promising, I would say, maybe one positive aspect of the lockdown that we're experiencing now, is that we actually have found new ways of collaborating with our clients, and as well as also with the wider project team and relevant constituents. And I think in this digital platform, there is definitely creativity to be explored, though that doesn't mean that I don't encourage all of us to hopefully coming back together in person. But there is still a great opportunity to help influence the work that we do. When it comes to in terms of hands-on delivering a design in perhaps an office fit out, for example, it will pose new challenges if we are not able to come back together in person and be able to visit the site in place. But I'm sure there are ways around it that we will need to come across if needed.
So just to check, I mean, who else has actually got, I mean, Hugh and Catrina, are you working on any office projects at the moment?
Yeah, we are. And it was actually, we were just about to go on site just before lockdown happened. But yeah, I think, you know, there's a lot of kind of discussion around workspaces and how they need to change in order to, you know, adapt and cater for new kind of working environments. I think we've seen a lot more people, you know, wanting to continue kind of flexible working, but we've also seen what, you know, people miss the most about working in an office environment. And it seems like there's a lot more kind of focus on the kind of social side. So perhaps we'll start to see, working spaces become more with more of a kind of focus on, you know, certainly kind of well-being, but also social spaces, spaces where people can come together and discuss things, and less of the kind of office, desk spaces. And perhaps more kind of meeting rooms, more space to be kind of sociable.
I definitely know when we were talking about coming back, we were like, we don't care about sitting doing our jobs there. We just want to be able to talk to people. I mean, not, you know, collaborate, talk to people, just in case you think I'm all about just chatting. Patrick, I know AHMM has got a huge amount of work in the commercial sector. Have you seen any impact? Have you been in on a discussion about how offices might change?
I mean, we've had to change some things slightly. I will mirror what Catrina said. In this seems to be a more emphasis on a social space than a work environment. More distance, we'd say, between the workstations themselves, so that people can move about more freely. But then also to open up more space in relation to collaboration, sitting, working together in groups and teams. But also on the other side of that, as I mentioned in my presentation, there's like more of an emphasis as well on a tactile free passageway, we'll say, to enter the office, to access some of the
facilities. That's so funny, the word tactile in particular, because tactile is something you always want, but no, tactile free now.
And then if we have tactile surfaces, you know, what are the materials in it, the cleaning, and believe it or not, even the cleaning and maintenance regimes behind those in post. And some materials, you know, react better. You know, they resist germs, you know, for a longer period of time than others. So, you know, there has been mentions about having these kind of surface materials present in office spaces. So, you know, a long way to go. But getting there.
So a question from Deputy Editor of RIBA Journal, Jan Carlos Kuturek. Hi, S&M, nice projects. I'm interested in how much surety you can bring to the clients, or indeed yourself, when specifying innovative or experimental materials. And I think he's thinking of the Janus house and the rubber, the spray-on rubber that you use there. Obviously, you know it's going to be waterproof, I guess, from the oil rigs, and you probably know its fire performance from that too. How do you make yourself certain of how things are going to perform? How do you tell your clients it's all going to be fine?
I think that first point is the most important one. Having your clients on board. You know, as we talked about in the presentation, a lot of what we do is kind of bringing our clients along on the journey, and that they're kind of wanting to, you know, do these things and sort of see alternative ways of kind of achieving, you know, outcomes. In this case, you know, with Janus House, it was actually a way of maximizing the budget and doing something that kind of didn't require a huge number of build-ups or you know, a long process of installation, and could create something that was a self-finished, exterior to the project as well. But yeah, the process is something that we push as a practice. So, we are investigating and we are, collecting documentation and making sure that we're kind of almost doing our due diligence on these materials, but also working really closely with the manufacturer. So in this case, we work with one specific installer who knew their product inside out, and they had just started to think about using it on domestic properties. So they'd done.
I bet they were so glad not to be going out to an oil rig.
Definitely. But it's crazy because they're usually working on these colossal, infrastructure projects or, huge roofs of kind of warehouses or biotech manufacturing, facilities. And then they come along to this tiny little extension on the back of a Victorian house. But they were super, they were very helpful. They really understood how the material worked. They guaranteed it, for 30 years. And yeah, they also saw this as an opportunity. They saw the domestic market actually as a possibility, a new possibility for their material. So rather than them just doing kind of large installations, they could actually open this up to a whole another aspect. So they were as keen as we were to experiment with it.
So while I've got you talking, Hugh, from James Taylor, another question, marketing question. Did you choose the name S&M to create a talking point? I mean, I can tell it's also maybe related in some way to your surnames, but it's a bit risque, isn't it? Come on, what's it about?
Well, it sounds like it's worked. But yeah, it's Stewart and McEwen, but we felt that was we felt we didn't want to call the practice after ourselves. So that, and we knew M&S would sue us if we called ourselves M&S. So.
It was M&S or S&M, a difficult choice. Okay, nice comment from Ermin Geoghener. Sorry, I'm not sure I've got that right. That terracotta is also supposed to be big this year. So I would include that in colours. But yes, that's a good one to be thinking about. I'm not sure what colour is your wall behind you. It's kind of edging towards terracotta, but maybe it's rather brighter than that, Hugh.
Yeah, this is Bongo Jazz 3.
Oh, sorry, not terracotta at all. Right. From Debbie Dawson, and I think this probably would go to Patrick. How important are BIMs in the specification? I think that means building management systems in the specification process when looking for product data. Sorry, apostrophe's thrown me there.
I actually don't deal that much on the BIM side of it because we have our own digital design team that deal with all that. But in relation to BIM, we actually don't rely on manufacturers' models. We have our own in-house families that we create because we will only bring the design within the model to a certain stage. We don't have to bring it past, we'll say, a certain, depending on what you use, LOD 300. We don't develop it to the end stage. So we're not really reliant on manufacturers' BIM. Possibly other practices are, but
Mina, be interesting to hear from Mina on that. Are you using BIM objects?
Yes, we actually do, but I think to Patrick's, I would concur with Patrick's observations that when it depends on from one project to another. If the project is going to that level of detail where we're doing stage 4 or 5 drawings, then we would actually use manufacturers provided information in that level of detail and try to capture it. We would luckily more so still remodel it because we have specific standards in the way that the company does sort of Revit, manages the Revit platform in general in projects. However, we would heavily rely on the information that the manufacturers provide, and if they can provide in 3D forms or Revit compliant components, then it will be much more helpful. But that's necessarily not the case in all the projects because sometimes we just end the design earlier where we don't get into that level of detailing.
Great, thank you. Hugh and Catrina, you may have different answers on this, which would be good to hear. So this is from Vicky Randalls. Social media has been mentioned a couple of times. Which social channels do you find most useful? Maybe for finding things out would be a good way to start.
I suppose everyone is different. I think we use Instagram a lot. It's amazing how now that they've introduced this new kind of system where basically you can tag items or materials or finishes or products into a photograph, and then you follow the link and go directly to the shop. It's just so usable. We often use Instagram and social media to for inspiration, and it's amazing to then be able to actually know exactly where things have come from. So yeah, I would say that probably we use Instagram the most, just because it's so user friendly in terms of purchasing things or finding where things have come from.
Yeah. So of the rest of the panel, is there anyone who would like to speak up for a media channel, a different one, different social channel? Anybody else a junkie on? Oh, no. Okay, I'm still on Twitter mostly, so much less aware of Instagram and getting my head around it, because it is such an attractive and lovely platform. A question from Mitch. We find that specifications can be changed at will. We put a lot of work in with the architect only to have the specification changed by the QS. Ooh, who is this a question for? I think probably Patrick. What can we do to ensure that the specification is maintained?
I knew this was coming on the ropes of the supper lunch. This happens quite a lot, because I mean, traditional contracts was the way to go, but because now there are so many levels of bespoke contracts, design and build, the way they're managed, the way they're progressed, the different design stages, different procurement routes related to it, that in a certain way, the architects can get involved to a certain point. We may produce the tender information, we may get novated and produce construction information, but there still is that leeway for a contractor who has bought the design and bought the risk, or has a subcontractor that might come down and can substitute a product for calls. There might be a long lead item. They might want to speed up the program. Something else might be more available, or it could be for cost. They can get something, that looks the same, performs the same, but, at a cheaper, to buy it and to install it. So yeah, it happens a lot. We do get it in the ear quite a bit about it, where we've had certain manufacturers spend a lot of time, collaborating with us, getting their products into the specification, and then with a flick of a pen, I'm afraid they're out and it's been replaced by something else. It's unfortunately, it's just the way that
I mean, it seems to me that when there's, if you are the kind of if you're the hero product, if you're something that the architect feels like defines it, as long as you don't get chucked out because of some major issue, people will fight for you through the process, and that's where you kind of need to convince people. But not all items can become those kind of hero items, can they?
No, I mean, if there's a lot of something that's visual, that has a good aesthetic, something that the client has insisted that is in the product, we will bring it to the nth degree to have it within it. But there are certain elements that are not very visual, not at the forefront of the architectural visual design element of it, that can be easily replaced, something that can be hidden. So
I've got a question. Yeah, thank you very much. We're really pushing it on the time now, so I'm just going to bring together a couple of questions at the end, which are really about architects and manufacturers, product suppliers getting together, how the conversation can go, I suppose. So Richard Tomlin is asking how post-COVID can some of the advertisers that will be on this call get architects into their showrooms, and then Liam Biggs is asking about whether you foresee the kind of COVID remote working becoming normal after the pandemic. If so, do you feel that digital meetings with manufacturers for example, are as productive as a physical meeting. So perhaps we could just have the architects on this, Hugh, and then Mina, and then Catrina. So Hugh,
yeah,
do you want to get to showrooms? Do you want to meet face to face?
Definitely. I mean, I think as Catrina touched on in our presentation, you know, we love samples. we love, you know, actually working with materials and you know, looking at them and touching them, etc. And you know, I think that's the huge opportunity of showrooms. I think in some way the other thing that we've been talking about is that we've also realized just how many samples we have. And actually, we probably need to do some recycling, you know, and potentially if, you know, showrooms could also be locations that we can bring samples back. You know, I think, you know, that I sort of remember, you know, reps coming round and sort of dropping things off, but also collecting samples. And almost it feels as though we've got to the point where we just kind of collect more and more and more in the hope of kind of one day using it. And yeah, I wonder if there's an opportunity for there to be a much more sustainable route to using samples as well.
And that will get you back in as well. I mean, that will want you, you know, it's that kind of process. Mina.
Thank you, Eleanor. I was actually going to throw out a more sort of interesting idea is having an opportunity to meet manufacturers on a digital platform actually would enable more interaction sort of at a smaller, shorter time frames. Because, for example, at least that I'll speak from our perspective at SOM, just there's the projects are sort of at a very fast pace. There's a lot of meetings happening. Our project teams tend to be very large, so we rarely actually find time to meet manufacturers. But if we could do them in a sort of almost like a speed dating manner in a shorter time frame, with samples sent in advance or afterwards, it doesn't matter. We actually will have, and I'm perhaps more selfishly speaking from SOM's perspective, but we will have much more opportunities to meet more manufacturers. So I don't know if there is, I wish there was a platform where actually manufacturers were grouped under based on the products and materials that they provide, and then we could chat with them or engage with them on an ongoing basis rather than waiting for someone to come into our office or for us to go to their showroom. Of course, yeah. I think everything needs to exist in tandem, but I think introduction of a more online chatting and communication platform would be actually a really interesting way forward.
But it's that one that run the same products side by side is kind of would be quite exciting.
Exactly, yes.
Catrina, have you got anything to add to that?
I think the only thing to add is that I think it could also be really interesting to be able to see more of the kind of manufacturing processes on, you know, through video platforms. So, you know, we try and go to workshops as much as possible, but it's, you know, it's actually, it's quite difficult, especially when they're not in London, let's say. And actually things like, you know, video calling platforms can allow you to have more of an insight into these workshops, into how these products or these materials are actually made and built, and therefore also understand how they could be used more.
So you're not talking about that video with a kind of beautiful sound behind it and things are rolling over. You're actually talking about a person walking around and saying, and here's this, and you go, well, what's that? And why does that go into it? That's what you
absolutely.
want that kind of interactive kind of sense. Great. Well, thank you, everybody, for your questions. Thank you so much to the panel for a really interesting, very diverse set of whatever. Talks, I suppose, and conversations. Thank you to those that listened and particularly those who asked questions. I've got some notes on what I meant to say at the end. I don't think there's very much. For those that want to carry on and to ask anything further or to carry on the conversation, you could either drop John, Richard or Sunil an email or follow the links from an email that you'll be getting shortly from the RIBA Journal. And we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.